Did you know that Abraham, the father of nations, had a third wife who gave him 6 more sons? Her name was Keturah. Few remember her, few speak of her. Yet she was the woman who stood beside Abraham in his final years, and her children carried his legacy across nations. Most have never connected to his story. Who was she? Where did she come from? And where are her descendants today? This is the story of Keturah, Abraham's third wife, a forgotten chapter of faith, a hidden truth that gave birth to nations. Welcome to Bible Origins, where we uncover the stories Scripture hides in plain sight. If you're new here, subscribe now, because what you're about to discover will completely reframe Abraham's story. Let's begin. The story of Keturah appears in Genesis chapter 25, verse 1. The text is remarkably brief. It simply says, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. That's it. No grand introduction, no explanation. Just a name that has puzzled scholars for thousands of years. Genesis tells us Keturah bore Abraham 6 sons, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. 6 sons who became the fathers of tribes and nations that would spread across the ancient world. Abraham gave them gifts and sent them eastward while he was still living, ensuring Isaac alone would inherit the covenant promise. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. Sarah had died years earlier, and Abraham was well over 100 years old when he married Keturah. This wasn't youthful passion or political strategy. It was a deliberate choice made in his old age, one that carried profound significance for the unfolding of God's plan. While Genesis gives us only a glimpse, the book of Jubilees dives deeper. Jubilees is an ancient Jewish text from the 2nd century before Christ that retells Genesis and Exodus with details drawn from tradition and oral history. And here's where the story gets fascinating. According to Jubilees chapter 19, Keturah wasn't just some woman Abraham met in his old age. She may have been part of his household for decades, possibly since his time in Egypt. Some scholars believe she was among the servants Pharaoh gave Abraham when he stayed in Egypt with Sarah. If this is true, Keturah witnessed everything: Abraham's devotion to an invisible God, the miraculous birth of Isaac, the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael, the binding of Isaac on Mount Moriah. She was there through it all, silently walking alongside the father of nations. Jubilees tells us Abraham loved Keturah. Their marriage brought him comfort and companionship in his final years. This wasn't a convenience or necessity. It was genuine affection and mutual respect. The man who had walked with God for decades, who had seen miracles and survived impossible situations, found solace in Keturah's presence as his life drew to a close. While the Bible does not specify Keturah's appearance, her tribal background, or her exact origins, we can piece together clues from scripture and ancient tradition. The connection to Egypt is particularly significant. When Abraham journeyed to Egypt during a famine in Canaan, Pharaoh took Sarah into his household, believing she was Abraham's sister rather than his wife. When God afflicted Pharaoh's house with plagues because of Sarah, Pharaoh realized the deception and sent Abraham away, but not empty-handed. Genesis chapter 12 tells us that Pharaoh gave Abraham sheep, cattle, donkeys, camels, and servants, both male and female. It's entirely possible that Keturah was among these servants. If so, she would have been Egyptian, or perhaps from one of the African regions under Egyptian influence. This would explain why later traditions associate her with Ethiopia and Kush, regions that had close ties to ancient Egypt. Imagine this: a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, suddenly given as a servant to a wealthy foreign nomad named Abraham. She would have witnessed everything that followed: his devotion to an invisible God, the altars he built in the wilderness, the impossible miraculous birth of Isaac when both Abraham and Sarah were ancient. She would have been there through decades of family drama: the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael, the binding of Isaac on Mount Moriah. If this tradition is accurate, Keturah's life was intertwined with Abraham's story long before she became his wife. She watched from the shadows as God shaped the father of nations. Some early church fathers and Jewish traditions connected Keturah with Ethiopia, the land of Cush. This region south of Egypt along the Nile was known in the ancient world for its wealth, distinctive culture, and people. The name Keturah itself means incense or fragrance in Hebrew. Some scholars connect this to the aromatic spices and perfumes that flowed along African trade routes. St. John Chrysostom, one of the early church's most prominent theologians, wrote about Keturah and suggested she represented the nations beyond Israel who would eventually come to know the God of Abraham. Whether or not this interpretation is historically accurate, it reveals how early Christians understood her significance. She wasn't just a footnote in Abraham's biography. She was a symbol of how God's blessings would spread to all peoples, not just through Isaac and Jacob, but through multiple branches of Abraham's family tree. The connection between Keturah and the African regions also reminds us that the biblical world was far more diverse and interconnected than we sometimes imagine. Abraham's family wasn't isolated in Canaan. They interacted with Egyptians, Cushites, Canaanites, Mesopotamians, and countless other peoples. Keturah's presence challenges us to see the Bible's narrative as genuinely global in scope. Even in its earliest chapters, Abraham faced an impossible choice. He had fathered 13 sons through 3 women, but only one, Isaac, could inherit the covenant God had promised. What would happen to the others? Genesis chapter 25, verses 5 and 6 tell us clearly, Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. This wasn't cruelty. This was wisdom. Abraham understood something profound about God's plan. The covenant promise that through his offspring, all nations would be blessed was meant to flow through Isaac and eventually through Jacob. But that didn't mean Abraham's other children were rejected or forgotten. They received gifts, provisions, and blessings appropriate to their place in God's larger design. The book of Jubilees expands on this moment. It describes Abraham calling all his sons together, blessing them before sending Keturah's children eastward. He gave them knowledge of God, instructed them in righteousness, and provided wealth sufficient to establish their own households and territories. This was a patriarchal blessing, deliberately given, carefully planned. Think about the wisdom here. Abraham was preventing the kind of conflict that had already erupted between Isaac and Ishmael. He was creating space for each branch of his family to thrive without competing for the same inheritance. And he was trusting that God's purposes would unfold through multiple lines, even though only one carried the specific covenant promise. The phrase, land of the east in Genesis chapter 25, is significant. In the ancient Near Eastern world, east generally referred to the Arabian Peninsula and the regions beyond, stretching toward Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. Abraham sent Keturah's sons into these vast territories, areas that would become home to numerous Arab tribes and trading peoples. Imagine that departure. 6 sons, each with their families and servants, their herds and possessions, setting out across the desert toward the rising sun. They carried with them not just material wealth, but something far more valuable, the knowledge of the God of Abraham. They knew the stories of their father's covenant. They understood that they were part of a larger divine narrative, even if they weren't the primary heirs of the promise. The journey eastward was both a physical migration and a symbolic movement. These sons were going to establish new nations, to plant the seeds of Abraham's influence in lands far from Canaan. Their descendants would become traders, warriors, priests, and kings. They would interact with Israel throughout the biblical narrative, sometimes as allies, sometimes as adversaries, but always as relatives who shared a common ancestor. This eastward migration also fulfilled God's original promise to Abraham in a way that's easy to overlook. God didn't just promise Abraham that Isaac would inherit Canaan. He promised that Abraham would be the father of many nations, plural, through Ishmael in the desert, through Isaac in Canaan, and through Keturah's sons in Arabia and beyond. That promise was coming to pass. Now let's look closely at each of Keturah's 6 sons and what we know about their descendants. These aren't just names in a genealogy. They're the founders of nations that shaped ancient history. First, there was Zimran. The name means songster or musician. Scholars believe Zimran's descendants settled in northwestern Arabia, possibly becoming one of the tribes mentioned in later Arabian records. Though Zimran doesn't appear prominently elsewhere in scripture, his line contributed to the tapestry of Arabian peoples. Second was Jokshan. This son's name means fowler or ensnarer. Jokshan had 2 sons mentioned in scripture, Sheba and Dedan. Both of these names appear repeatedly in the Old Testament as important trading nations. Sheba, famous for its queen who visited Solomon, was renowned for its wealth in gold, spices, and precious stones. Medan was a significant trading partner with Israel, dealing in livestock and goods from Arabia. Third came Medan. His name means contention or judgment. Medan's descendants are believed to have settled in northwestern Arabia, near the regions where Midian would also establish territory. Though we don't have extensive biblical references to the Midianites, ancient records suggest they were among the trading peoples of the Arabian Peninsula. Fourth, and perhaps most significant, was Midian. His name means strife or judgment. The Midianites play a crucial role throughout the Old Testament. They were the people among whom Moses fled after killing the Egyptian. Moses married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, who was a priest of Midian. This means that Moses' father-in-law was a direct descendant of Abraham through Keturah. The Midianites also appear as traders who sold Joseph into slavery in Egypt, and later as adversaries during the time of the Judges. Midian's descendants settled primarily in the northwestern Arabian Peninsula in the regions east of the Gulf of Aqaba. Fifth was Ishbak. His name means he releases or he leaves. Ishbak's descendants are less clearly identified in scripture, but ancient sources suggest they may have migrated further northeast toward Mesopotamia, possibly settling in regions near modern-day Iraq or Syria. Sixth and finally came Shuah. His name means wealth or prosperity. The most famous mention of Shuah's descendants comes in the book of Job. Job chapter 2, verse 11 introduces Bildad the Shuhite, one of Job's 3 friends who came to comfort him. This connection places Shuah's descendants in the region of Uz, somewhere in the Arabian or Syrian desert, and suggests they maintained knowledge of God and were considered wise men in the ancient world. The descendants of Keturah's sons settled primarily in Arabia, establishing themselves as some of the most important trading peoples of the ancient world. The Arabian Peninsula was the crossroads of commerce in antiquity. Spices from India, incense from southern Arabia, precious stones and metals from various regions. All of these goods flowed through caravan routes controlled by Arabian tribes, many of whom trace their ancestry back to Abraham through Keturah. The ancient trade routes connected Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean world. Arabian traders were the middlemen, the merchants who made international commerce possible. They brought frankincense and myrrh from the south, textiles and dyes from the east, grain and wine from the north. They established oasis cities along the trade routes, places where caravans could rest, resupply, and exchange goods. The wealth of Sheba, which so impressed King Solomon, came largely from controlling these trade routes. When the Queen of Sheba traveled to Jerusalem to test Solomon's wisdom, she brought with her spices, gold, and precious stones, the signature goods of the Arabian trade. This encounter between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba represents a meeting between 2 branches of Abraham's family, Isaac's line through Solomon and Keturah's line through Sheba, united in trade and mutual respect. The Midianites, too, played significant economic and cultural roles. They were nomadic traders who moved between Egypt, Canaan, and Arabia. When Joseph's brothers sold him to Midianite merchants, they were participating in a well-established system of slave trade that connected the ancient world. Later, when Moses fled to Midian, he encountered a people who still worshipped the God of Abraham. suggesting that Keturah's descendants maintained at least some knowledge of the faith passed down from their father. Keturah's descendants represent something profound about God's promise to Abraham. When God first called Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, he said, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Notice the scope of that promise. All peoples, not just Israel, not just the line of Isaac and Jacob. All peoples on earth would somehow be touched by the blessing that flowed from Abraham. Keturah's sons were part of how that promise began to unfold. Through them, Abraham's influence spread across Arabia and beyond. Through them, nations arose that would interact with Israel, trade with Israel, and eventually come to know more about the God of Abraham. Some theologians see in Keturah's story a preview of the gospel's reach to all nations. Just as Abraham blessed children beyond the covenant line, God would eventually extend his grace beyond ethnic Israel to include people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. The Apostle Paul writes in Galatians chapter 3 that those who have faith are children of Abraham, blessed along with Abraham who believed. Keturah's story whispers this truth centuries before Paul articulated it. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed the historical reality of these Arabian peoples. Inscriptions from Dedan, references to Sheba in ancient records, evidence of extensive trade networks, all of these findings support the biblical narrative. The descendants of Keturah weren't mythical. They were real people who shaped real history. Keturah's story reminds us that even those who seem to play secondary roles in Scripture are part of God's magnificent design. She wasn't Sarah, the mother of the covenant child. She wasn't Hagar, whose dramatic expulsion and rescue formed one of Genesis's most emotional narratives. She was simply Keturah, Abraham's wife in his final years, the mother of 6 sons who went east, yet through her, nations arose. Through her, Abraham's name spread across Arabia. Through her, the promise that Abraham would father many nations continued to unfold. She stands as a quiet testament to how God works through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes. Think about the moments in your own life when you felt insignificant or overlooked. Perhaps you've wondered if your story matters in the grand scheme of things. Keturah's narrative speaks directly to that doubt. She wasn't the star of Abraham's story, but she was essential to God's larger plan. Her children became nations. Her legacy endured for millennia, and all of it happened quietly, almost invisibly, in the margins of Scripture. This is how God often works. He takes the forgotten, the overlooked, the seemingly insignificant, and weaves them into tapestries of redemption and purpose. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verses 27 and 28 tell us that God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are. Keturah was one of those lowly things, one of those quiet figures whose name appears only briefly in Scripture. Yet her impact reverberates through history. Her descendants shaped the ancient world. Her marriage to Abraham in his twilight years brought him comfort and produced lineages that fulfilled divine promises. As we close this journey into Keturah's story, let's remember what Romans chapter 8, verse 28 promises us. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Keturah loved Abraham, and through that love she found her place in God's story. Her children went east, carrying with them the knowledge of the God of Abraham. Her legacy spread across nations. Her name, though little known, is written in Scripture for all generations to read and ponder. Every person matters in God's economy. Every life has a purpose. Every story, no matter how quietly it's told, has a place in the divine narrative. Keturah's tale reminds us that God's plan is bigger than we imagine, more inclusive than we expect, and more beautiful than we can comprehend. In the quiet years after Sarah's passing, God was still writing Abraham's story. In the birth of 6 sons sent eastward, God was still fulfilling his promise. In the marriage of an old patriarch to a woman whose name means incense, God was creating something fragrant and lasting, a legacy that would perfume nations. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to something new in Scripture, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue exploring these hidden truths together. Leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most about Keturah's story, or share which biblical character you'd like us to explore next. Remember, no chapter in God's story is ever forgotten. No life is insignificant in his eyes, and your story, like Keturah's, matters more than you know. Until next time, may you walk in the light of God's unfolding plan, knowing that you too are part of his magnificent design. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next episode. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Genesis 25:1.